Step into the mic today. Your familiar faces, Chris Miles and Ted Jeffries, but our guest of honor, Jay Bilas. You know him as a former Duke player and assistant coach, but for us, he is one of us. 25 years as a broadcaster now. Jay, first and foremost, had you realized you've been one of us longer than you were an actual player?
Yeah, I was probably one of us while I was a player. Maybe I was a better broadcaster when I was a player. But it's good to be with you guys, Chris and Ted. Thanks for having me. It is weird. There are a couple things that are a little bit odd at my stage of life. One is how long I've been doing my job. And the other is, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I always considered myself a Californian. And I've lived twice as long on the East Coast as I ever did on the West. But I still can't get the West Coast out of my blood. I still feel like a West Coaster.
So when you go to watch games in the time zones, do you still feel that difference? I hear West Coast guys talk about that all the time.
Yeah, well, for me, Monday Night Football started at 6:00, and you would have Sunday NFL games would start at 10 a.m. Out west. So, you still had the rest of the day after you watched games, and it was a really, really fun way to, do things. It was awesome. I loved living out west, and I love the East Coast now. The only thing, oddly, I thought when I moved east, the hardest challenge would be, it's colder out east than it is, in Los Angeles where I grew up. But the thing that gets me now, at age 56 is the middle of the summer. The middle of the summer, it gets so hot and humid. I could handle it when I was in my 30s, didn't bother me. But now I'm in my mid 50s, and I'm like, I've had enough of sweating my tail off playing golf in the middle of July. I'd rather go out west and play.
Well, certainly the NBA community dealt with that this year as everything has shifted due to COVID. So you think of schedules and what we're used to being out of whack. The NBA draft is just a few days before Thanksgiving this year. And for you, as being a college basketball analyst, there was no March Madness. And some of the names we're familiar with, but most people that are paying attention to the NBA draft, they haven't seen James Wiseman. They might not even know the name Obi Toppin, because typically guys like that make their name in the NCAA tournament. And Ant-Man is certainly someone not on everyone's radar because, again, we did not have March Madness. So for those guys and other guys preparing for the draft, how is this year unprecedented?
Boy, that's a great question. It is so different. And I really feel for the players that are coming out in the draft this year because they're not getting the same kind of attention. There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty as they start their professional careers. They've not had the same opportunity to work out for teams. They've not had the same opportunity to interview, to go to the combine, and it's not been done in a rhythmic fashion. I think sports have rhythms to them. And all of our rhythms were off watching the NBA playoffs in the bubble. As great as it was, and as grateful as we all were to watch it, it didn't seem right. It just seemed odd, and that's why I think ratings were down. And that's true across the board, really, with all sports, because of people's sports rhythms. But there's something that I'm going to be really interested in seeing, and that's the decision making of the teams and the GMs and the presidents. That I think that there's a chance that the COVID thing and not being able to hold as many workouts, you're really going to be going off their past performance and going off your scouting that's already been done. And sometimes I think some of the combine stuff, some of the late information you get can make things a little bit cloudier, and maybe some better decisions will be made, doing it off of what they already have rather than quote unquote new information that they normally gather. Cause I'm not sure that's always better for decision making. Reasonable minds can differ on that. I'm just going to be interested to see.
Jay, that was my question. When you talk about the teams and their decisions, they talk about, especially for seniors and guys making that decision, whether they should leave after their, third year or head into the draft. And it's always said that, scouts get a chance to see more of what you cannot do rather than what you can do. This COVID situation kind of benefits the players to that in that regard, as you were just talking about, where these scouts have not seen, they've done enough homework, but that last minute decision making that they would have to get involved in from the draft camps. Do you think does that actually benefit the players, or does it work in favor of the teams?
Well, it kind of depends, Ted. I mean, it's a good question. It kind of depends on, like, sometimes it's an issue of can the player fool the NBA? Like the ones that stick around longer, it's not that their stock goes down because somehow they get picked apart. It's because the NBA has more time to watch them and they see, well, wait a minute, this guy isn't improving in areas where we hope that he could, or he's not as good as we thought. They get exposed by staying around longer. And that's sort of what I've always said about going early. Like, I think players should leave early if one, they're ready to be pros. If they've decided I've had enough of college, I want to be a pro right now, and they're ready to start their next life, start their professional careers. But there is an element of, if you're a fraud and you don't want to get found out, then you go and get in and get some money while you can, because ultimately you're going to get exposed if you can't play. So that's part of it. But the other part of it is kind of the old Moneyball theory to me. Like, I'm sure you read the book Moneyball, which was primarily about baseball, but it was basically about biases that we have in scouting based upon what we see. So if you go and watch some guy that has the look to him, great body, 5-tool player, and you watch him hit a 500-foot home run, even though he only hits 230 and his on base percentage is low, low for that kind of prospect, you're going to be unduly influenced by, man, I saw that dude hit a ball out of a ballpark. I mean, he's unbelievable. It's the same. I think the same thing tends to happen in basketball, that you can kind of get seduced by athleticism or, seduced by a workout. Like, I used to go to some of these workouts, not a ton of them, but you go watch, and you'd be wowed by somebody, and you'd have to remind yourself, this isn't 5-on-5. Like, he's got a body of work in 5-on-5, and it didn't impress me like that workout did. And I've fallen victim to it of sort of over. I was going to say overhyping, but overvaluing a player based upon what I saw last, instead of the whole body of work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think Joe Alexander is the guy from West Virginia University. I covered him, and he was a good basketball player at WVU, but we didn't think he'd be a lottery pick. And I think he ended up going 7th in the draft because of how great he looked in workouts. And there wasn't a big body of work on him. He was 6'7". He could run the floor, and he could shoot open shots under John Beeline. But then he went into the draft, and you're like, oh, he's athletic. We can make more out of him. And that never happened. Something you've been very vocal about, and you've used the term here just now, Moneyball, value, all of these things. I think you're accurate when you talk about NBA players. But then for college players, it was something that rubbed me the wrong way when I covered college basketball. The fact that they weren't getting paid. When you see how much work is being put in, when you see how much revenue is being generated, and you hear about the contracts. So I know you said that you believe college basketball players should get paid. I agree with you on that. But how do we do that? For instance, one of the concepts I had is, okay, maybe, how a player performs and what university he attends. Then when he graduates and when he's done with his eligibility, there's a certain amount of money set aside. But what do you propose as a way to compensate these players? Because I think it has to happen.
Yeah, and I think it will happen eventually. First, there'll be the NIL, name, image, and likeness money. They'll be very restrictive at first, and then it'll slowly open up, and it'll lead ultimately, I think, to players getting paid down the line. Who knows the time frame? But it's a really good question, Chris. But one of the things that I think about when I contemplate that question is, in what other area of life do we even have to ask that? Like we don't have to ask that question with regard to literally anyone else. Well, how are we going to pay everybody in this industry? How are we going to pay coaches? How are we going to deal with facility spending? How are we going to do all this? It's a free market, and so to me, that's the answer: is pay. Each school, if you want to pay. If you don't, and see how it works out for you, just like you would with coaches. Nobody's requiring every school to pay their football coach $9 million like Clemson and Alabama do. They can make their decisions and still compete. And the same thing's true of, I think, of football, basketball, whatever, any sport. I would leave it up to each individual school to make their decisions on how they want to handle it. Because, it's funny, we say that athletes are students who just happen to be athletes, and they're students to be treated like any other student. But every non-athlete student is allowed to earn or accept whatever they want, and it doesn't change their status as a student. And non-athletes get scholarships too. So some people will say, well, athletes are already compensated. They are already paid because they get a scholarship. And you say, okay, well, what about the non-athletic scholarships? And there are tons of them out there. Are those students paid? Like if you have a music student, a music major that gets a scholarship, is that music major paid? And if it is paid, why isn't the music student on scholarship restricted in making money in his or her chosen field like athletes are? We don't have amateur musicians. We don't make that to say, well, they're learning their trade so that someday they can go on, like that nonsense argument they make for athletes. But we've been doing this so long that we're almost prisoner to the theory behind it. Like, well, we have to control it. We can't let it get into recruiting, and we can't let it get here. We can't do this, and we've got to have guardrails. And I don't think it's necessary. I think open it up and let everybody do what they want to do.
Yeah, especially when you consider it's already in recruiting, and that's been documented. We don't have to go down that road, TJ.
No, absolutely not. I was just thinking, what when you talk about name, image, and likeness, a guy like LeBron. I mean, excuse me. LeBron James. So if he made that decision and he ends up going to Duke or Kobe Bryant, Zion Williamson more recently.
Williamson's a good one.
Yeah. What type of money does he command, and how does that? That's obviously going to work in Duke's favor with regard to recruiting. All the top players are now going to want to earn money like Zion. It seems like there should have to be a limit on it, but I don't think that you can once you open up the doors, nor do I feel like you should.
I don't feel like you should. I think it'll all work itself out easily. Like, it's funny. I think athletics more than anything is a meritocracy that the athletes understand. It doesn't mean there aren't petty jealousies in that, but there are petty jealousies in everything. So sometimes I'll have coaches push back on me saying, we're going to have fights in the locker room and all this stuff. And I was like, do you guys have fights in your coaches' meetings? Because, the head coach makes way more than anybody else. And you have different levels of pay for assistants. You guys all fist fighting over who gets paid what. And, they make it seem like, well, everything has to be equal because, they're all working hard and all that stuff. And I said, it's not even equal as to who gets a scholarship. And they don't dole out playing time equally. They don't say, well, it's unfair that Zion is playing more than the walk-on, so we're gonna, everybody's gonna start the same amount of games and play the same amount of minutes. They act like it's little league. And look, Division III is open to everybody. Division II, Division III. If you don't want to compete, where the revenue is, then go into Division II and Division III. I mean, Ohio State, if they want to play Amherst at the Shoe for free admission and no TV, that's fine. That's available to you. They make it seem like the athletes are the only ones that are forced to make this false choice of amateurism or don't play at all. The schools need to make the choice. Like, if they don't want to play sports, don't play. But if you're going to play and you're going to sell the athletes for literally billions of dollars through media rights deals and apparel deals and all that, I think it's wrong to the point of immoral to limit the athletes to a scholarship only and pretend like you're doing them some big favor.
Jay, how deep is this upcoming NBA draft? Because, again, it's so hard to discern. You look at LaMelo Ball. Well, we haven't seen him. We hear about all the scouting reports and what he's looked like and how he's grown and he's taller. And James Wiseman, we barely saw him. So from your standpoint, how deep is this class in compared to recent classes?
It's deep and good. And it's deep in good prospects, good players, some of whom could be really good. Like a guy like Tyrese Maxey from Kentucky, for example, who could be really good. But you're not particularly sure because he's so young. It doesn't have a signature talent like Zion or like Anthony Davis, where there's a no-brainer number one, or barring injury, you're talking about a player who's going to be a perennial all-star and maybe someday knocking on the Hall of Fame door. It doesn't have guys like that. It may have a Donovan Mitchell in there that we're not, you think is going to be good, but you're not sure is going to be great. And he turns out to be, but you should have been taken in the top 3 of that draft. And was taken 15th. And there, who knows? There's probably a Draymond Green in there that's going to be a second round pick and winds up being an NBA All Star. But there are a lot of solid prospects and guys that could be very good, but there are a lot of question marks as well. And you mentioned Lonzo Ball or LaMelo Ball. I remember when Lonzo Ball came out. I thought he had the chance to be a Jason Kidd type player. And it hasn't panned out yet. He's been good, but he hasn't been as good as I expected. And, you've had players like that, but that's the way the draft has been forever. And it doesn't matter whether it's the NFL draft and they get 5 years to look at those players, or the NBA draft. These players are really well scouted by really smart professionals, and it's hard to get it exactly right. It is really hard to get it exactly right, especially with them being so young.
Jay, we're all dealing with this COVID-19 situation. Pro sports, now college sports, have been trying to manage their programs and their sports teams during this time. As this basketball season ramps up, how confident are you that as we are approaching what everybody is talking about as a surge, that basketball will be able to make it through the season, not having the luxuries of the NBA to create a real bubble to keep players from being 18, 19, 20-year-old, student athletes who will, go out and be kids?
Yeah, Ted, that's a really good question. I mean, my confidence level ebbs and flows. So earlier in the COVID process, I was pretty confident that we were going to be able to get a season in, but still concerned that it's an indoor sport. There are way more games than in football, and a lot more travel. So and smaller rosters, that if you do have an outbreak within a program, it's going to compromise the whole team in a way that it might not compromise an entire football team. Because football's done a pretty good job of keeping position groups separated and offense and defense, all that. They've done overall a really good job in that, and still have had some problems. I'm sure we'll have game postponements and cancellations like football. But we're going to start, I think, on November 25th with a few sort of isolation or semi-bubble environments. One down in Orlando. There's going to be another in Asheville, that like the Maui Invitational is going to be played in Asheville, North Carolina, stuff like that for non-conference games. I have the most concern when we get to conference play, and just like we're in ACC country, all of us. So just like Syracuse flying down to Miami for one game and flying home doesn't seem like it's going to work all season long. You'd like to see, can they get multiple games on a road trip? If that's possible, because most of them are going to be I believe will be in sort of in-person classes. Like they'll be taking online courses. Duke, for example, is staying in a hotel. Their basketball team's in that campus hotel, so they're not even in their dorm rooms. They're staying in a hotel, so they're kind of isolated now. But if this gets really bad, like some of the experts are saying, I think basketball is at a little bit of risk for the regular season of having a really bumpy ride. I'm hopeful, and I'm not worrying about it because there's nothing I can do about it. That's been the weirdest thing about this is normally, you are planning and trying to put things together, and there's really no way to plan. And so I was talking to one of my bosses today and said, hey, we're thinking about this, we're thinking about that. And I said, look, I'll do whatever you say. And I'll go wherever you say go, because I wouldn't want to be making the decisions you're having to make now with so much uncertainty. I mean, you can't even plan. So I have a lot of respect for all the different schools, conferences, media companies, whatever, that are trying to figure this out, because there's no playbook for this one.
When I hear you say that, and I remember the moment that March Madness was, it's just something that I never thought I would see in my lifetime. I'm at work and I'm preparing for a show. They say, "Yeah, no March Madness. It's not happening this year." And I'm like, "Okay, how serious is this? How much of a concern? How big is that thought process going forward with the planning? Like you were saying, you're just planning for tomorrow, but everyone you're involved with, I know that has to be looming as a dark storm above everyone's head."
Yeah, it's really kind of a little bit of a attitudinal or mental health challenge, if you will, to prepare for something that may be shaky, frankly. So you gotta kind of prepare as if everything's going to go forward as normal, but there is no normal anymore. And I think we're all getting used to some of this or all of this, but it's an uncomfortable feeling to be used to this. So you just have to do the best you can. But your point about remembering sort of how surreal it was when everything got kind of canceled. I look back on that a fair amount. Sports was really behind the curve on a lot of this. We were late to this party, and people like to say, "Well, Rudy Gobert was the tipping point," and I'm like, "No, he wasn't." All these schools were shutting down and had been shut down by the time they made the decision to pull the plug on the ACC tournament, the Big East tournament, Big Ten, you name it. And not until later on did they make the decision about the NCAA tournament. So we were kind of hanging on, thinking that things might get better and we could handle it. And the Ivy League was first and basically said, "Nope, this isn't going to happen, and we're shutting it down now." So a lot of American sport was last to the party when the rest of America was pretty far ahead.
When you talk about the NCAA tournament, and if basketball is able to make it through, and we all remain hopeful that these teams, get by pretty much unscathed, and can make it to a tournament. Coach K has been a proponent here for because of this unique time, for allowing more teams to get into the tournament. How feasible do you see that proposed plan, and how do you think that would work overall? Basically, having regional bubbles where you have a lot more teams that are involved in the tournament.
Well, there are two things I love about it. One, I love the sentiment of everyone being involved in a year like this. I think that's a wonderful sentiment. And I like the idea that the NCAA has to be really flexible this year to allow teams to do things that they weren't allowed to do before. Like, for example, in these pre-conference tournaments, the Maui Invitational, whatever, they should drop the requirement that only one team per conference can play in one of those MTE, multiple team events. That should be waived this year. Who cares if they're in the same league? If they can get really good games in, get the games in. But Coach K's proposal, although I love the sentiment, I think is unworkable. There's no way for us to have essentially 300 plus teams or 353 teams in Division I. We're not going to be able to have a tournament of that size. It wouldn't work. If we were even able to pull it off, it would be far better to have every conference play their conference tournament and have their champion and go like we normally would. That would just be easier, cleaner, and I think the right thing to do. I mean, how would we structure it? I'm sure we could figure it out, but you certainly wouldn't want the number one seed to play, team number 353. You'd have to have buys and all that stuff, and I don't think it would be worthwhile just to say that everybody got in the tournament. But that's just my personal opinion. I mean, I haven't really talked to Coach K about it. A lot of people like the idea. I'm not crazy about it. That doesn't mean the idea is wrong, but I do think it's unworkable, especially in a COVID environment. I don't see how we're going to travel all these teams, put them together, and think that that's going to go well. I think we'd be very fortunate to get a 64 team tournament off and done right.
when every time I hear Coach K's name, I think about the first time I saw him, and he was already this mythical creature, this Hall of Famer, this national champion. But that wasn't the case when you first met him. But this is a DMV podcast. So that team you were on and the team that you were a coach or part of as an assistant coach, there are so many players from our area, namely my colleague Grant Hill, who's one of the coolest guys you'll ever meet. But going back, I mean, Tommy Amaker, Danny Ferry, Johnny Dawkins, Kenny Blakeney, Brian Davis. I mean, when I say all of those names and you think about the transplant from the DMV area down to Duke, was that a part of the conversation when you were there? Like, did those guys ever talk about it? Did you guys feel that energy that came from this area with such immense basketball talent?
Oh, no question. And also Billy King was on our team from Sterling, Virginia. We talked about the DC area all the time, especially Dawkins. You know, Johnny went to Mackin High School, Mackin Catholic, and he actually played with Dominic Presley that went to Boston College. Dominic and I were teammates at the Portsmouth Invitational. He passed away many, many years ago, but that had to be the Presley-Dawkins backcourt at Mackin. I don't think this is an exaggeration, Chris. I think that had to be the fastest backcourt in high school history, unless Usain Bolt somehow played somewhere. Those dudes could motor. There's a lot of talk about DC, Northern Virginia, all the great players and all that. And it was a ton of pride. And I mean, we used to laugh about it all the time. Like Johnny, there was a movie back then called DC Cab that I think starred Mr. T. Now,
Mr. T was in it, yeah.
That movie sucked. But Johnny Dawkins thought it was like On the Waterfront or The Godfather because it had DC in the title. So he was always tied DC Cab. And like, come on, man. So if it was LA Cab, you wouldn't have liked it. Like, come on, man, that movie sucks. But there was a ton of pride of the DC area, the DMV.
Jay, when you talk about Coach K, he produced a lot of great talent out of Duke. He's accomplished so much, and he's imparted wisdom to you guys that I'm sure, like most great coaches do. What are some of the best lessons that you've learned from Coach K that you've kept with you and always kind of rewinded in your mind as a reminder of, your times and being taught by one of the greatest coaches in the game?
Yeah, I think Ted, sort of a lot of the lessons about preparation, about being persistent in pursuing, your goals and trying to win, and really fighting through things, and then but also sort of the idea of next play. Like you got to move on from what just happened, no matter what it was. We win, we lose. You turn the ball over, you have a steal and a dunk, or what. You got to move on and make the next play and put that behind you. We can parse through it later and learn from it, but we gotta move on. And I use that phrase in my life a lot, next play. But look, I'm biased, I guess, for Coach K, that I think he's the best that's ever done it. But a lot of it has to do with the longevity of it. That he's been doing this at Duke for, I think, 40 years now, and he's been coaching for 45 as a head coach. Now, whether it was Terry Holland at Virginia or Dean Smith at North Carolina or Lefty Driesell at Maryland, or all these great coaches, especially back in the day when we played, a lot of it has to do with how long they went, because those coaches were so great, all of them. And so it even sounds odd. It's almost like the argument about MJ or LeBron. You get so passionate arguing about it, and you're like, really? Like, they're 1 versus 2, we're going to argue like this? And so when people say, is he the greatest ever, all that, he's in the conversation at least, and that's pretty damn good. And so I feel very fortunate not only to have played for him, but especially to have played for him and have had this long of my life where he's still coaching where I played. Like, my relationship with him, and then I believe with the university, and all of our teammates and guys that played there with, that I played with and came after is profoundly different than it would have been if he'd coached there for 10 years and then gone to the NBA or gone to another school or something like that. That is the most, that happens most often with coaches.
Jay, again, when you meet Coach K, there's this certain energy that you're amongst greatness. And some people just have that, whether they achieve the greatness or not. Another guy that I feel like when I saw him coaching high school basketball, I thought, this is a college coach, and it's going to happen soon. Kevin Keats was that guy. Now, I don't know if he's going to be a great college coach or not. Happy to see him in his second job coaching in the NCAA now at NC State. But is there a coach that you think is on their way to greatness that maybe is overlooked, that's someone that is doing a great job that you're like, hey, keep an eye out for this particular head coach?
Boy, there's so many of them. Like so many of the young guys, but young is a relative term now. It used to be a coach could get a job in his late 20s, early 30s, and establish a career in basketball. Now, some of these guys are hanging on so long that young guys can't break in anymore. And you're an assistant way longer, or you have to take a lower level job where it's really hard to win, and it's really hard to to kind of move your way up. One of the guys, and I think he's gone beyond up and comer, is Chris Mack, that I think is the real deal at Louisville. Chris obviously did a great job at Xavier and played there and everything, and coached with Skip Prosser. But I'm a big fan of Chris. I think he's going to be one of the next great ones. But we're going to see a lot of turnover. I mean, a lot of the guys you're talking about, like Coach K, Roy Williams, Tom Izzo's a little bit younger, but they're all, they're 60s, 70s, Jim Boeheim, Rick Pitino, you name it, Leonard Hamilton. They're not going to be able to go on that much longer. So you're looking at some end dates coming up, and how the transition's handled and who replaces those guys is going to be really important as to how those programs, can sustain excellence going forward. Because it's really hard. You guys know it's really hard to sustain it. And there's no rule book for that one either. Like, do you hire somebody in the family? Do you go outside the family? Most of the ones that established the family weren't in the family when they first got there. So it's kind of it's a really hard challenge.
Jay, being a DMV based, podcast, this area lost an icon, basketball lost an icon in John Thompson. Can you share your thoughts about the effects that he has had on the game of basketball, and what he has done for Georgetown University?
John Thompson was a giant in the game, and was so far ahead of his peers in issues of social justice. I think when I was first coming up as a broadcaster, I thought that the two of the coaches that I looked up to most were John Thompson and John Chaney, and men who got it on a different level, that were doing way more than coaching basketball. They were fighting social battles and fighting stereotypes of them, their program, and their players, and weren't afraid to step forward and say, this is wrong. But you look back on that era in the late 70s through the 80s into the mid 90s, when both those men, great men, were coaching and winning at such a high level, and really how misunderstood things were, and we weren't evolved, I think, as a society as we are now, to even ask the questions we're asking, and that's profoundly sad. But they, like John Thompson, I used to love listening to him talk. And I thought it was great. Like I used to go on his radio show every once in a while, and I always, you always kind of tease him about whoever thought you would be a member of the media, with as much as the media thought you gave them a hard time.
Right.
But yeah, all that Hoya paranoia stuff. Like the one thing that I remember, and I'm sorry to ramble on about this, but one thing I remember is the image that some people had of Georgetown was so foreign to who those guys were. Like I met Patrick Ewing in high school, and through friends got to know him a little bit, and I thought, what a great guy. Like when he blocked your shot or dunked on you, and might snarl a little bit or have a furrowed brow. Like Patrick Ewing is as good a guy as you're ever going to meet. Michael Jackson and David Wingate, Reggie Williams, all those guys were unbelievably good guys and just great basketball players. And the thing that they were, as a team, they were incredibly smart and disciplined. So they might have had a reputation as, Hoya paranoid, but everybody was scared of them and all that. But it wasn't like they were physically, bull garden people. They would trap. They were always in the right spot, and they had an eraser back there to block your shot. It was something else to watch those guys. They were magnificent, and I think the '85 team is one of the great teams of all time, really. And if not for a perfect game by Villanova, I think they'd go down as one of the top 5 teams, I think, to ever play.
Yeah, Jay, I'm sorry, Chris, real quick. I agree with everything you just said. The only thing that I would make exception to is when they added Michael Graham to the program. That was the real physical, physically demanding player that Georgetown had. That's the only exception I would say to your statement.
Intimidating as a dunker and all that, but people forget he really didn't play that much that year. That was '84 when they won in Seattle, if I remember right. And so he would, he came in, was had a bunch of dunks. He might have scored 10, 12 points in the final, but during the course of the season, he really didn't play all that much. But man, those guys were such studs. I remember, I think it was 1985, the year they lost to Villanova in the final game. We started the season 14-0, and we won a home game, and Georgetown was number 1, and we were number 2 in the country. And the Cameron crowd started chanting, "We want Georgetown." And I remember thinking, well, I'm not sure we do. Like, I'd have to guard Ewing. I'm not sure we do. You might want to rethink that one.
Right.
That's incredible. And TJ, we'd be remiss if we got on this podcast and started talking John Thompson and didn't send out our wishes and our love to JT3 and also good friend Ronnie Thompson. And if he's listening at any point, man, we love you, Ronnie. I've known him for a few years now, and he's friend of this group and family to some of us as well. But speaking of which, the brotherhood at Duke, we had a discussion on one of our shows one day, Jay, about golf. And apparently Grant Hill thinks he's better than Chuck. Apparently he's better than
Everybody's better than Chuck. Everybody's better than Charles Barkley.
So where are you on this, man? Are you better than Grant at golf?
I'm way better than Grant at golf. Yeah, I'm way better. It's not close.
Yeah, I had to find out the answer to that because apparently there's a hierarchy there.
Well, I don't. The funny part, I don't know. I play with some of the guys, some of my former teammates, and most of them don't have. They're still in basketball or coaching or something, so don't have as much time to play as I do. But I can't remember what year it was. It was the same year that Coach K was kind of messing with the Lakers during the summertime. That the Lakers had offered him the job. And Mark Allery lives up in D.C. in Bethesda and is a member at Congressional Country Club. So he had set up a round of golf with him, me, Johnny Dawkins, and David Henderson. And so when we got to the first tee, Johnny says, I haven't played a round of golf in over a year. So we're haggling over strokes on the bet. And Congressional's a really difficult golf course. So I think I wound up saying, all right, well, I'll give you 6 strokes aside. So 12 strokes for the 18, 6 per 9. And Johnny wound up shooting in the low 80s. And I'm like, you haven't played in a year?
He
and shot in the low 80s. It was unbelievable. So I happened to be playing at his club about a month later, and I was hitting balls on the range, and the pro comes out and says, "Hey, how did Johnny play at Congressional?" I said, "He played great. He cleaned me out. He shot an 82 or something." And he said, "Man, he's been here hitting balls every day for the last 60 days or whatever it was." And I called him and I said, "You MF, like you hustle me." And he said, "I didn't lie." He goes, "I did not play around to golf. I hit balls every day, but I did not play around to golf." And I'm like, God, that's total DC stuff. One, thinking DC Cab is a good movie, and two, hustling a teammate of yours and a brother on the golf course. So much for the brotherhood. It's all about getting in your wallet.
Brother's keeper, I guess not.
Yeah.
My brother's keeper, I guess not. And
I
then
want my brother's wallet. That's all it was.
All right, here comes the most important question of the day, and unless TJ has something else, the final one: T.I. or Jeezy? Which one is it, Jay?
Jeezy. No, it's Jeezy. T.I.'s pretty good, but that's going to be. I was very impressed that Jeezy called him out and said anywhere, anytime. But I'm a huge Jeezy fan. Obviously, both are great, but I'm a huge Jeezy fan.
Chris, on that note, I don't think we can hold the Twitter master, the 4-year starter, Mr. ESPN analyst, and great friend of ours. Jay, thanks for being on the show. We know, as you always say, you got to go to work.
I got to go to work, baby. Chris, Ted, great being with you. Thank you, guys. Big fan of you guys. Thank you.
Thanks for stepping to the mic. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jay. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.